Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, for another fun video on the Commemorative Half series. Today, we get to look over an amazing set. Now, I'm really excited about this one because this is the Panama-Pacific Exposition. Now, we're going to be talking about the coins, but we're also going to be talking about the histories. The history of the French effort, the history of the United States effort, some things that have been forgotten or erased from the history books that we need to be paying attention to. And then we'll go over the coin's values and a little bit about the design elements. So there's going to be a lot of information to cover. So do me a favor, stay tuned, consider hitting that subscribe button, and make sure you hit that notification bell because every week we're going to be putting out a new video on content regarding this particular series. If you haven't seen this before, go back and watch the rest of them. You're going to really enjoy. So let's start out with the year 1876. The French started to work to understand the layout, topography, and geography of Panama. After several routes were produced, they started to identify some issues. The first one that they wanted to do was created by Weiss. Now, Weiss wanted to actually create a tunnel through the mountain ridge at Calabria, but they found that there were potential problems with that. They also wanted to see if they could develop one that actually went at sea level all the way through, cutting an entire swath through the mountain. Ultimately, they settled in a series of lock stages, and we'll talk about some of those in just a minute. But in order to legitimize, in order for the French to begin working on the Panama Canal, they sent Lucien Weiss to meet with the Panamanian and the Colombian governments. See, they needed to work out a treaty with the land. It would be signed March 20th, 1878, the year the first Morgan dollar came out, and it would be known as the Weiss Concession. Now, again, as stated, to legitimize the canal, they had to do some things, and this was create a committee or a Congress and start working on the financial backing that would be needed to build relationships with the countries that would be involved, develop prices, get staff and people on board, and write dozens of proposals. After much debate, they finally settled on the route, the location, and the type of build. Estimated at 6 years for the construction process, the lofty French plan included flooding rivers and lakes in the hopes that this would alleviate the need to dig and excavate more land. But ultimately, this series would be wrought with sickness, disease, and tons of mishaps. At the peak of construction by the French, 19,000 workers would be employed, but yellow fever and malaria would be ravaging the workers. The fast-paced effort caused serious safety concerns, and some 25,000 men would lose their lives in the construction of the French effort of the Panama Canal. But it wasn't just men that were lost. Women and children were dying as well. In fact, the leader of the project would lose his entire family, his wife, his son, and daughter, to yellow fever during the development. It's believed that all the sickness from the French experienced during this time frame was due to excavation, microbes in the soil, and not just the insects. Although controlling the mosquitoes would prove to be a vital solution for the Americans, relieving much sickness and thereby reducing the amount of deaths. Many developments, realizations, financial hardships, ultimately the French would have to sell the rights to the United States. Now, it was no secret that the United States wanted a shorter route. Remember, it was a 16,000-mile journey around the Cape of Good Hope. Winter storms, high seas, and gale force winds were hazardous to shipping. The route through the Panama Canal wasn't actually Panama. It was first established that Nicaragua would be the plan for the first canal. But when the French went to President William McKinley, December 2nd, 1989, they decided that Panama would be the place to eventually put the canal. It would take 5 years in order for this to be signed, but eventually it was. And on February 23rd of 1904, the deal was struck. President McKinley acquired the rights to the canal. Now, understanding the troubles and situations the French would endure, the U.S. started the monumental task of the canal build. May 10th, almost 9 years to the day, 1913, the same year as that famous vehicle was produced for the five brothers, the Panama Canal would be completed and the waters of the Pacific Atlantic would finally touch. While a great history lesson, I want to delve into a segment of the story that, well, is hidden, lost to time, erased, as it were. I read an article on Panama in my research for this video. It led me to a book. That book was written by Maxa Lasso, and she wrote the book Erased, the untold story of the Panama Canal. And what she says is that when the French left Panama, it wasn't really the jungleness that we were led to believe. It wasn't the empty vastness. In fact, there were a lot of countries and continuous trade that was happening along this particular corridor. There was a sense of organization, and it was quite extensive, as the populace was created around the rivers and lakes because of the center of trade. They would trade a variety of items, but like myself, the Panamanians loved chocolate and coffee. And what happened next? Well, it was a bit disconcerting to me. And I wanted to talk about something since we just talked about the Louisiana Purchase and seen some of the parallels that issues faced the Indians during the time of the Great Purchase. See, we're finding ourselves in a situation where the natives would suffer at the hand of development. Once again, all for the sake of progress. In a survey that was conducted by the American Census, they found that Panama there was about 350,000 people. But in this narrow scope, this narrow corridor, the ones that the American bought 5 miles on each side, over a fifth of the population lived in this little corridor where the canal was going to be built. Now, similar to the rivers of the Mississippi, Colorado, the Thames, or the Nile, population densities are higher around a river or lakes. And this is due to the ability for people to trade or maneuver goods without being impacted by the harshness of crossing land masses or mountains. The 5-mile swath on each side was purchased for about $10 million, with an expected payout to the Panamanian government of $250,000 annually. Now, Panama and the U.S. agreed on this, that it would be turned over to Panama, but it really wasn't thoroughly thought through. See, efforts had not been properly made on how to resettle these key areas around the canal. And the problem is that some of these isolated corners were not so isolated. In fact, this was a significant swath through the center of the country, affecting, again, 1/5 of its population. We would see this in many aspects of different cultures. When the industrialized country moves in to create growth, it disrupts other portions or even entire populations. This particular development created a power gap and a control center whose epicenter was the waterways of the canal. So the U.S. did enjoy a monumental feat: construction, medical, engineering, in the build of 1913. But the canal wasn't completed in 1913, and I know what you said. Yes, it was completed. No, the initial development was done, but the Panama Canal featured a massive expansion in 2007 that would take another 9 years. Dredging, expansion of the locks, they allowed for more goods to pass through each year. See, what people need to understand is that as the canal expanded, so did the ships. The expansion occurred, larger and larger container ships were created. Many tout this as one of the reasons for things like ocean pollution or increased incidences within spillage of goods and oil. Others say that this globally changed the way that goods and services be traded, and they're right. Panama would find itself again at the epicenter of another political series of demands, waged hard stuck in the middle of two major economic powers, China and the United States. But let us remember the remarkable achievements of the Panama Canal, because again, it did change the economic world. But I want to go through and I want to talk about the coins themselves. See, Congress authorized the Panama-Pacific International Exposition of 1915, President William McKinley. The purpose was, of course, to celebrate the completion of the canal, but it was also to celebrate the recovery of San Francisco. Remember that in 1906, San Francisco had suffered a devastating quake, which destroyed much of the city. The coins were approved: $50, gold dollar, 2.5 gold piece, and then 2 different $50 gold pieces. And those things are sweet. 1 round and 1 octagonal. The bill issuing these was signed into law January 16th of 1915. Now we're going to go through each one of these very briefly and talk about these individual coins. The first one we're going to talk about is the $50. The obverse, designed by Charles Barber, depicts a figure of Columbia scattering flowers from a cornucopia that is held by a baby angel. The inscription, Panama-Pacific Exposition, with the S mint mark, is located to the left of the date. Famous designer George T. Morgan was selected to design the reverse, and the bird might look a little familiar to you. That's correct. It's the same bird that you'll see on the 1878 Morgan dollar. Obviously, this one a little bit different as it's perched on the Union shield. Its left is an oak branch and the right is an olive branch. Kind of ironic, considering that they would show a symbol of peace the year after World War I would break out. The U.S. Mint struck a total of 60,000 pieces, but the net mintage after the 32 remaining were unsold were melted was 27,134, and they are considered very scarce for this commemorative $50 and very sought after. We'll talk prices here in just a little bit. A well-known sculptor from New York, Charles Keck, designed the gold dollar. Now this faces a 2-line inscription, United States of America, and the date is placed below the man's chin. The reverse, the statement $1, as well as the central device of dolphins representing the 2 adjoining oceans through the canal. Folks scoffed at the $2 price, and in the end they had to melt a whole bunch of these, leaving only 15,000 of these coins remaining for this issue. The quarter eagle was struck with a maximum mintage of 10,000, but Mr. Zerbe was only able to sell 6,749 of these, meaning that 3,251 had to be returned. Barber and Morgan teamed up again to design this particular coin. Here we go again with Columbia astride a hippocampus. Now this is a Greek mythological seahorse, and she's holding a caduceus. Now if you know the caduceus from the medical profession, these represent the strides that were made against yellow fever. Again, you're looking at the left-facing American eagle, top E pluribus unum, and you can see the $2.50 icon located here. A new artist showed up on the scene by the name of Robert Aitken, and he got to design both of the $50 gold pieces. Now, as a verse features Minerva, she's the Roman goddess of wisdom, skill, and agriculture, and the date shows up in Roman numerals. Now, at the top of her shield, you'll see those there. The central design is surrounded by different beaded motif, and you'll see that that has been adapted from Greek design. The octagonal piece, on the other hand, is a little bit smaller in design, and stylized dolphins were created, each one of those representing the connection of the Pacific and the Atlantic. When you look at the reverse of this, again, as stated, it depicts an owl perched on a ponderosa pine surrounded by pine cones. This owl is representative of wisdom. Now, here's an interesting point. A 14-ton press from Philadelphia had to come in order to strike these coins. Unfortunately, not many of them sold. Mr. Zerbe had to return a great number of these, leaving only 645 of the octagonal and 483 of the round ones. The reason for this? The price. They simply were just too much money. Again, looking at $100 for a $50 gold coin, this would have amounted anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks' wages, and coin collecting just wasn't where it was today. Here today we have a great numismatic following. Back then, economic certainty was just too high, and the task was just too difficult for Mr. Zerbe to sell these, and he had to end up returning these to the United States Mint to be melted down. So if you're looking at one of these, man, you can expect to pay a pretty hefty price for some of these. How much is the price? Well, let's look at this right here. For the $50 for a 27,000 mintage, you're looking at spending about $2,500 for an uncirculated coin. If you're looking at the gold dollar, you got a 15,000 mintage with about a $1,750 price tag for one of those in uncirculated condition. We go up to the $2.50. That's a 6,749 mintage, and you can expect to pay a cool $6,000 on that one, but you ain't paying nothing like if you're trying to get one of these $50 gold pieces at a cool $250,000 a piece with mintages at 645 and 483 respectively. You're going to expect to pay a cool $500,000 if you want to get these two coins. Total price point, you're looking at about $510,000 for this set if you want to get this in AU condition. Now, those prices may go higher because, as you know, if you're trying to buy one of these in auctions, who knows where that price point will end up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a good note to end on, and I'm telling you, this has been one of my favorite videos thus far. Do me a favor, if you've enjoyed this, please make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell, because next week we're going to be talking about another gold coin, and this one is going to be the remembrance of the birthplace of President William McKinley. Minted in 1916, we're going to be talking about the McKinley Memorial Gold Dollar, and there's a lot of information here to discuss. All right, folks, stay tuned. Each week we're going to be bringing one of these until this entire series is done. Like, share, subscribe, and follow. And you know what? I will see you guys next week for another amazing video on the commemorative series. Be well, be blessed, folks.